ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disloyal Idiots Podcast here on the Fans First Sports Network. I'm Christian Guzman, joined by Andy Pregler. Steve Howler yet to return from the injured list. We will wish him a speedy recovery, and also not just because of his back, but because he has children to deal with as well.
It is the ultimate, physically unable to perform list. He's got the bad back. He's got the kids. There's just a lot happening there. And he is physically unable to be here with us today. So, Christian, I guess the number one topic that we have to jump into is, did your ACC invite get lost in the mail, or did yours actually arrive in the last week?
No, mine got rejected by Carolina.
See, it's funny. Mine got rejected by Clemson. And
Congratulations.
You know, this is the thing, as the ACC looks to expand. For those that did not know, ACC was looking to add a combination of Stanford, Cal, and SMU. That proposal is, and I was reading this today, technically has never gotten to a vote. It has gotten to the pre-vote stage where there is not enough votes to allow it to actually happen. And I think that there's a lot of things to dive into. You and I actually talked about this a little bit last week about the idea of this. I think from a logistics standpoint, it doesn't make sense. But the argument that I saw, and I know last week you and I were both talking about, like, why would they do this? Where is the argument in, like, actually doing this aside from adding more schools? The argument that I saw added, which I thought was actually kind of compelling, was the idea that it sounds like Florida State is leaving no matter what. Like, at this point, I think we can all pretty much say Florida staying in the ACC long term is probably not going to work out, because they're either going to demand really unactionable terms long term, or they're just going to buy their way out with Saudi money. So adding these other schools does add a layer of protection for when Florida State inevitably leaves. But the second part of this is that as things continue to shift and change, having West Coast inventory for ESPN is kind of important, because as of now, if you look at what, and John, shout out to John Casillo, who former podcast host and former News Magician writer, as he wrote for his actual day job for TV Rev, this whole thing is now about television inventory. And Fox and NBC now have the only Power 5 West Coast inventory. And ESPN, once everything settles, will have nothing. And so the AAC doesn't seem likely to add Washington State or Oregon State, because neither school wants to join the AAC from a philosophical or financial standpoint. And for ESPN, not having college football on at 10 p.m. feels like a loss, especially when Fox and NBC will have 10 p.m. kicks. And yeah, to me personally, this makes a ton of sense if ESPN is going to foot the bill for these schools to come aboard.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the only ways it makes sense. Again, I'm still kind of 50-50 on it, because, like, yes, I see the reason why it's good, and a lot of it is also the trying to keep up, as you mentioned, with the Big Ten and with the Big 12, in order to make sure that you're not falling further behind than the ACC already is in the revenue game. It's like it's the big elephant in the room that everyone knows, that the ACC is squarely in the number 4 spot in terms of the conference earnings, behind the SEC, Big 10, and Big 12. But on the other hand, like, for the ACC, the grant of rights, unless Florida State is going to get that sudden influx of money, based on the reporting that's been happening. And there's not a lot of ways that the ACC is going to suffer financially in the short term. Long term, who knows? That's a different story, especially because no one knows how this is all going to settle in the next 5-10 years, even longer, because that's when the grant of rights for the ACC goes through. And so it feels like a panic snap move, but at the same time, it probably isn't too bad, I want to say, but at the same time, not necessary. I'm now at the mindset where yeah, it's so confusing whether it's actually a good move or not. I'm not sure if it's a good move, but I'm not necessarily sure it's a bad move either if the vote went through and
Yeah.
the schools came to join the ACC.
This is I'm going to steal a line here from Stephen Godfrey, a podcaster, Twitter extraordinaire, whatever. He had the quote that in college athletics, when there are large sums of money involved, ambition often trumps logic. And logically, there is no reason for the ACC to expand to the West Coast or even to the Texas area. That's not what this conference is about. That doesn't fit the brand profile. That doesn't fit anything, especially when you consider the travel from Winston-Salem to Stanford. Like that's unfeasible. Like I think we're all in agreement there. However, I do think that there is a logical roadmap here to adding Stanford is huge for the Olympic sports. The fact that we can talk about Syracuse soccer playing Stanford on a regular basis, that's amazing. Like that was a Final Four game, College Cup game.
No, it was almost the College Cup game, but unfortunately, Clemson beat Syracuse in penalties to beat them to that Final Four, to that championship game, and then Jordan Morris happened.
Yes, Jordan Morris was on that Stanford team. But so Stanford's like the gold standard in Olympic athletics, which is something that, to the ACC's credit, like the ACC is the conference of Olympic sports. Stanford is the school of Olympic sports. So like it is a very natural fit in that regard. The problem is that Stanford is located in California and not in North Carolina or South Carolina.
And also not near the biggest of transport hubs either.
Exactly. And so this is where the ESPN part comes into play. And again, I don't know if ESPN is going to be sitting here and spending an extra $100 million a year for the ACC to like add these schools and make it worth it. And so if that's off the table, it's off the table. However, like, you know what happened this week? ESPN bought a sports book, or let me rephrase. ESPN did not buy a sports book. ESPN strategically partnered with a sports book to force out one of their biggest competitors and enter into the sportsbook space by partnering with Penn Gaming, pushing out Barstool from Penn, and ESPN Bet is coming this fall. And without getting too in the weeds of this, like, sports gambling's kind of the only revenue driver in media right now. And college sports is a huge part of that. And I cannot imagine ESPN willing to sit on the sidelines and say, we have no West Coast games. Now, I think, Christian, to what you're saying, the ACC not getting involved and letting ESPN in the Mountain West or something figure out what they're going to do with the West Coast schools is probably the more logical sense here. It probably makes the most logical sense here. However, have you taken a look at Syracuse's 2024 recruiting class? For football, sorry. Man in the chair swivels. I did this today.
For those who are listening on your podcast network of choice, I am rapidly searching our recruiting class right now. Okay, I have 24/7 loaded up.
I would. So I was doing this exercise with Sean Farrell, who is a high school sports reporter for the Bergen Record and a former News Magician writer here. And of the 17 Syracuse commits, 6 of them are from New Jersey, which is great. And we should talk about the Syracuse. You and Christian, we are going to need to have after signing day, because I'm scared about commitments until they're actually signed. We are going to need, if this class holds up, we're going to need to have like a deep dive into the pivot that has taken place over the last 18 months in Syracuse recruiting. It is the hardest pivot I've ever seen in a continuity era. Like, no head coaching changes. This pivot was direct, and like right now Syracuse is a top 40 recruiting class. That's weird. But if you look at that list, not just of the commits that we have, but of the guys that we're still offering and that are kind of warm, there is a lot of Texas. There is a lot of California. There is a lot of areas that the ACC is looking to expand with these schools that Syracuse is already starting to dive into. And part of that is because California's recruiting profile has taken a nosedive. Football in California, high school football in California, we are not qualified to talk about it, but it is, other people have written about it. It is not what it used to be. And it's become the new Florida, where there's just a mountain of 3-stars available there. And if you find the right connection, you find the right program to feed from, it could become incredibly valuable to your program. And so, again, I don't think that adding Cal and Stanford just to add Cal and Stanford is a good move. I think that if you add Cal and Stanford and ESPN chips in the money, there's enough football reasons here where Syracuse playing out there once a year becomes valuable to what it looks like Dino Babers and his staff are trying to do. And again, we're going to go into this more in a little bit, but I have so many questions about this football season and Dino Babers is standing in this season. Tease. But Christian, I'm just kind of curious as we talk about this, like, you've seen this in Jersey where non-Northeast schools, cough, cough, Michigan, have emphasized New Jersey to a level that has fundamentally altered the recruiting in the state. And that is exclusively because realignment.
2 things. One, I'm just glad that Jersey recruits are not going to Rutgers. I do have an inherent bias against Rutgers for reasons that are too long and not necessary for this podcast. 2, when it comes to ESPN footing the bill on all of this, because I think that's the more pertinent discussion. We can get to what this means for Syracuse recruiting in a bit.
Yep.
But the more important discussion is, yes, ESPN needs to shell out the money, because it's clear that Fox and NBC were willing to shell out money to help the Big 10 and the Big 12 in their conference editions. The thing is, we've seen ESPN, especially in the last couple of months, do some weird things with money, especially when it comes to its distribution of money. One day you have them signing Pat McAfee to a multi-year deal. The next day they're cutting 33 plus of their talent staff, including some of its biggest names like Jeff Van Gundy. So just from what we've seen, ABC is still thinking about, I should say the Disney company and ABC are still thinking about potentially letting ESPN go somewhere else. So this does mean that if you're right and ESPN Bet does make a lot of money, then the ACC is in a good position. So maybe add Cal and Stanford and SMU without having it be too much of a financial hit. And then hopefully they can also help with the logistics of all the other sports as well that are going to be affected. And maybe also the addition of the ACC network helps with that as well. Because the ACC network actually is a little bit of a big feather in the ACC's cap and all this as well. since, I mean, you're not relegating games to Peacock, and who knows where Fox is going to stream Big 12 Olympic sports. Even if they are going to, it's probably going to stay on ESPN. Yeah, but if ESPN continues to show the cost-cutting measures that it has, especially with its talent division, then it might not have the money to logically continue to try and expand out west, or help an expansion out west for the ACC.
Yeah.
It obviously won't make sense for the SEC. Like, that's not going to happen. So it has to happen with the ACC.
No.
Like you said, with Washington State and Oregon State, there's no Power 5 school right now is logically thinking a move to the AAC is going to be a good decision. So if ESPN's financials continue to look seesawy, in like it has in the past couple of months, then this doesn't even become a question of whether or not the ACC should expand. It just shouldn't, because the money's just not going to be there.
Right. And I think that that's, again, we kind of touched on it last week, is that the next 5 to 7 years are going to be proof of concept of whether this bubble continues to grow and solidify itself, or pops. Because at this point, the metrics show less and less people are signing up for cable. Streaming is becoming not affordable in the way that people thought it was going to be. Again, we don't know what's going to happen with the writer's strike and how that's going to impact streaming platforms, because that's the reality, is that streaming has basically become cable. You're buying Peacock for The Office, and the fact that it has the EPL is a nice to have, or you're buying the EPL and the fact that it has an Office is a nice to have. Like, they go hand in hand.
It's not just the writer's strike, also it's the actor's strike as well.
Yep.
Because all these companies also have to deal with the actor's strike that's happening right now.
Exactly. And so, again, this is something that I thought John really distilled well in that TV Rev article, was college sports is now the most valuable inventory that is affordable, because the NFL is on a stratosphere that no one can achieve. No one can match that. Major League Baseball is a behemoth of an inventory slog that has its own individual distribution network that is imploding as we watch, but also has the fallback of one of the industry-leading streaming techs. So MLB is kind of like this exception to the whole sports rule, where baseball will always kind of be there, and MLB is going to do its own thing. It's not worth even bringing in baseball to this conversation.
Manfred, add your damn blackouts.
We can have an offline conversation about that. We can have a podcast about that. I could go on for hours about that, because for those who don't know, I used to work at Major League Baseball. There's just so much about this that I know, and about that it's about continuing to evolve about this. Anyways,
well, I will be sticking around to hear this.
Yeah. So the big thing is that when you look at the other professional sports league, the NHL is highly regionalized. It's all about Chicago, New York, and Canada. And then when you look at the NBA, it's not about the regular season rights, it's about the playoff rights. Who has the NBA playoff rights? College football is the only sport where the regular season games and the playoff are all valuable. It extends for a significant period of time. Well, we're talking about months here. And there's enough inventory where you can spread it out because of the number of D1 college football teams that are available. Now, what this means is that you end up in a situation where we are at now, where there are 3 groups at the top that are essentially dictating what happens with everything else. You have Fox, you have NBC, and you have ABC, ESPN. And I think the ABC, ESPN piece, the ACC has aligned itself with the SEC and ABC, ESPN. And as John eloquently wrote about in this TV Rev article, it's now about what inventory can ESPN get that is not under that ACC, SEC, every other college sport umbrella that has been under Fox or has been under NBC for years that they can now bring over to their side. And the biggest fish of that is Notre Dame. And so when we go back to the realignment votes, this is where this all comes to crux, because it was Notre Dame that wanted SMU. It's Notre Dame that wants access to Texas, wants a Texas game that it can win every year without having to play Texas A&M, Texas Tech, or any of these schools. It wants to go to Dallas. It wants to beat a bad team in Dallas. And they want a team that like has history, so you can roll the black and white clips of SMU versus Notre Dame from the 50s or the 40s or whatever. It makes a ton of sense. And the ACC said, we will do all of this stuff because if you join, we will get a crap ton of money, because that means that NBC goes all in on the Big Ten, ESPN goes all in on Notre Dame. Like, this whole thing makes sense. And Notre Dame said, no. We would like you to add SMU. So that way, in the weird ACC football scheduling thing we have, we get to play SMU on a semi-regular basis. But we're not joining the conference. And that seems to be the biggest holdup. Because if you're a Clemson, if you're an FSU, bringing Notre Dame into the conference almost guarantees two things. Payouts go up, imbalanced payouts become the norm, in order to make sure that Notre Dame always has a little bit more of the pie. And then if you're Clemson and Florida State, you get a little bit more of the pie. And Christian, I don't know about you, but like, I don't know if I like the idea of Notre Dame joining the ACC.
I'm more in favor of it. I think that's what we've been saying for years, and the logical way that the ACC should go about the realignment, because we knew it would eventually happen, especially after USA and UCLA happened and Oklahoma and Texas happened. What we've been saying is that the most logical thing, and the thing that ACC needed to do first and foremost, was not only get Notre Dame in, but also get West Virginia back in. Like, those were the two schools that the ACC needed to get back in. West Virginia makes sense for a lot of reasons. You have the old Big East schools, obviously, with Syracuse, Pitt, Louisville, even Virginia now. You know, you bring those natural rivalries back in with West Virginia. But with Notre Dame, it makes sense, since they're already part of the ACC and every other sport except football. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame has that clause in its contract right now that says if they're going to stop being independent, they have to join the ACC. I'm not sure how long that clause lasts for. The big holdup, and it just kind of makes sense to the ACC because, or at least in my opinion, because it brings a little bit more legitimacy to the conference. Like when we saw it in the COVID year, we saw it firsthand in the COVID year where Notre Dame joined the ACC just out of necessity to get games in. It kind of raised the level of the conference, and that worked well. It felt like that was one of the last years that, the ACC fielded multiple very competitive teams in the league. And that was mainly a lot of the Notre Dame effect. And then when Notre Dame went back to being independent, that kind of slowly waned. The big holdup right now, and it always comes back to TV, is that NBC deal.
Yeah.
Because for those who do not know, because this kind of happened a while ago, and it's probably lost in the shuffle of all of this news, especially with all the big other schools that are moving conferences, is that Notre Dame has a new president. And their new president is the former head of NBC. So Notre Dame is more likely than not, just because of that relationship, going to strike a much more secure contract with NBC just in general. And so this is all in the ACC's court now to try and coax Notre Dame away from that NBC deal, which is going to be one of the most difficult things to do, especially with the guy who is now leading Notre Dame.
Yeah, I just look at this whole thing, and I don't like that this conference's future is tied to Notre Dame, but it really is. And
It is. Mm-hmm.
the problem is that Notre Dame independence is such a talking point, and I do think that the Big Ten is sitting here going, look, adding Notre Dame makes a ton of sense for what we're trying to do. We have USC in here. Like, that's one of the rivalry games that Notre Dame clearly cares about. It's just a question of how much tradition actually holds the hand of the Super League, because I think at this point we are getting a college football Super League. I have made peace with this, that in my lifetime there's going to be a 2-conference college football system where there are teams in the West and teams in the East, and they will meet in the playoff every year. And it doesn't matter if ESPN doesn't have the regular season games, they have the playoff. That's all anybody cares about. But one, if we get that, we're doing pro rel. Just that needs to be a prerequisite.
Yeah, and that has to be.
Calling that now.
Please.
But two, Notre Dame sitting here as the domino of being like, we value independence, we value our rivalries, we value X, Y, and Z, is kind of the whole reason that this system hasn't completely gone that way yet. And I don't know. I think Notre Dame joining the ACC under some conditions where it is a full-time ACC member, but maybe they get to play an extra non-conference game a year, so that way they get to keep their rivalries or whatever. Like, I don't care. Just get Notre Dame into the ACC in order to make sure that the ACC can be the third conference, because that's what everybody's fighting for right now, is that it is the Big 12, the ACC, and everybody else trying to be that third conference with the Big 10 and the SEC. And the Big 12 has done, like, all credit to that leadership group. They've played this really, really well. They looked like they were, shit out of luck for a long period of time. And lo and behold, they sit here and they're actually in pretty damn good shape.
The biggest holdup with the Big 12 is that they don't have any type of streaming service, which has been a Fox decision for the longest time. It remains to be seen how long they'll hold out on that for. Because if Fox finally decides to give and start some sort of streaming service, that's when it gets really dicey for the ESPN.
And I think, again, we don't know where it's going. All we know is that for right now, Syracuse is in the ACC, which has a TV deal, has a grant of rights. We're pretty much set for now. What happens next is anyone's guess. But if you would like to rep, or you are a fan of any of the schools that we have just talked about for the last 30 minutes, let me tell you about a little t-shirt company out of Indianapolis called Home Field Apparel. Home Field Apparel is your one-stop shop for the best vintage college gear, back when we didn't have to care about realignment and we could only care about, man, I really hated that school for reasons that don't make any sense, but it's okay because we hated them. They have some of the best stuff. It is Big 12 week. Well, not really Big 12 week anymore, but it's Kansas, Missouri, Kansas State, all dropping on the site this week. Some great collections. They added UTEP as well. Check them out at homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code NUNES23, NUNES23, for 15% off your first order at Home Field Apparel. I got my Syracuse 1959 National Champions undefeated shirt today. It is glorious. Vita the Goat will forever be the undefeated champion of the Syracuse t-shirts. This 1959 t-shirt is very close. Give me a season, it might usurp Vita. Just saying. As the wonderful, amazing Steve Haller is coming out for halftime. He has been cleared by the medical staff. He is now coming in for the second half of this podcast.
That I am.
You cleared concussion protocol, right, Steve? Right?
Yeah, I cleared Rosamond Gifford Zoo in time to make it back for the second half of the pod.
Oh, good. So you didn't do a Yankees training staff and get misdiagnosed with a concussion because you didn't run into a guy's knee and potentially that might cause problems instead of just a stiff neck.
No. We're good here. Although,
man, you guys have some unresolved baseball trauma to work out. Meanwhile, the Pirates are winning right now. I'm having a great time.
Let's not talk about what happened this afternoon. Let's move on.
Baseball
swiftly.
season has been over for like 2 months. I don't know what you're talking about.
Ooh, what happened this afternoon? Did Yuri Perez you?
No, it was much worse.
Oh.
Don't.
Leave us
Don't.
Sorry, now I'm intrigued.
No.
Oh, top headline on MLB.com.
No.
Marlon. Oh my.
Yeah.
The
Nothing
last good part of his team, the bullpen.
Yep. Yeah, we didn't need that, did we?
All I'm gonna say is, you know what? It's great to be a Pirates fan right now. Just kidding. Steve, you joined us just in time as we're going to talk about fall camp. You missed the realignment talk, and now we're going to talk about the football fall camp. Shout out to those who are covering fall camp. It seems like there's less coverage this year than you would normally get. Maybe that's because you make camp super closed and you don't make it super accessible for everybody to cover camp. Who knew? But it is happening. We are getting closer and closer to the regular season start. Last week, we talked about the injuries that were taking place along the defensive line and the linebacking group. This week, we're talking about bodies joining the roster. Miles Farmer, a suspended starting safety formerly of Nebraska, has joined the team. He was the second leading tackler on Nebraska last year, and Matt Rule, the current head coach of Nebraska, who came in this offseason, did not give any details as to why Farmer was suspended again and why he was in the transfer portal or any of these things. Just that, quote, he failed to adhere to team standards, unquote. And Farmer's a really good player. He's a redshirt junior. He's somebody that when I was listening to the Split Zone Duo preview podcast of the Big Ten, they talked about him on Nebraska as like a key part of that secondary. Syracuse is now adding somebody that I spiritually feel like fits into that rover position really nicely. I'm intrigued.
For the record, I think the rover spot for you is like offensive line talk for me.
Yeah. Oh, dude. I grew up watching Troy Polamalu play safety with the Steelers. I like. There's a part of me that clicked the other day where I realized that I grew up watching a like really funky 3-3-5 that was disguised as a 3-4 defense for years because of Troy Polamalu. It's taken me a while to get there.
Troy Polamalu didn't play safety. He played wherever he damn well pleased.
Right. Yeah.
And he was all in favor at it. Anyways, we're not here to talk about Troy Polamalu and his amazing hair. We're here to talk about the rover position. We're here to talk about Miles Farmer.
For the records. I've got a ways to go. I'm sitting there with the lettuce. So.
Christian, I guess we're kind of interested because like one of the positions that we did not talk about last week in depth was the secondary. But there is a lot of turnover in that secondary, and Miles Farmer being added to the group is another new face in what might be a starting lineup of all new faces. Like,
it's yes and no.
Yeah,
it's yes and no because the startings, because he was a safety. However, the starting safeties are locked. We know what the starting safeties are because the only person who's coming in to replace a person in the safeties is Jason Simmons Jr., who basically was a starting safety last year because he just played whenever Elijah Clark and Jahad Carter rotated out. And so now that Jahad Carter's out, Simmons slots right in. So your safeties are set. It's Simmons, Barron, and Clark. The question is your cornerbacks. because you don't have Garrett Williams, you don't have Deuce Chestnut. And from what we've seen in the past, backups are hit and miss, except for one. We know Isaiah Johnson's probably going to be one of the starters. It's who's going to play opposite him.
Well,
And so,
my question with that is, are those safeties locked? Because if you bring in Turner or Farmer, sorry.
well, yes,
if you
true.
bring
Yeah.
Farmer, does Elijah Clark move to that other starting corner spot?
Yeah.
I'm going to say no, because I think they really like Clark at safety. And just because of Clark's body and physical type, they're going to need someone who can cover bigger receivers in the slot, which is kind of the trend that is now turning in football right now. And so Clark fills that role perfectly. So I think they'll keep, if anyone, they'll replace one of Barron or Simmons.
If you want someone that's big and physical, Farmer's 6'3", 200, playing safety.
That is true. And so that's why you would probably only replace Simmons then instead of Clark, because then you have both sides of the slot covered. I don't think he would play a rover. I'm sorry.
Just next man. Do you think there's any chance that Simmons would move outside, or does that just put him to next?
I think you just move Simmons into the role that he was in last year, which was who never needs a rest. He gets a rest. Simmons slots right in, and there's little noticeable drop off in play in the safeties because Simmons is good enough to be a starter. Yeah. And I don't think he'll replace Barron in the rover, because while, as Andy mentioned, and as we've all mentioned, he has the physical attributes to be a rover. For those who don't know, 6'3", 200 is what Farmer is listed as. And that rover is the quarterback of the defense. And so it needs acclimation time to understand how to order that defense around efficiently. And because Barron's already done that for a year, he might as well continue to do so for said year. And it's going to be pretty hard for Farmer to learn how to quarterback a defense that he's only going to be part of for, at this point, 3 weeks until the first game of the season. So,
right.
So if you want to put him in the starting, if you want him starting, it's probably going to be in place of Simmons.
No, and again, that brings up the similar to what we're doing with the running backs. Is that Farmer over the first two gets comfortable, and then by game 3 against Purdue, he's ready to go full speed, and he's the starter, and Simmons is on the bench.
Payne Durham's not there anymore, right?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
No, he's with Tampa.
Yeah.
That's not Purdue.
Yeah, I just feel like the secondary for the last few years, it's been lockdown corners, and the safety position is a bit of a wild card once Cisco left. And I feel like this year, the safety position was locked down and the cornerbacks were a wild card. But again, one of the things that I think is most interesting about this team is that we saw what Tony White could do. And we were obviously 3 of the biggest cheerleaders in the Tony White fan club. But we now no longer have Tony White. We got Tony White's OG version of him. And I think that there's a lot of thought that, it's still a 3-3-5. It's going to be the same thing. I'm not so sure. Like, I think that there's like a non-zero chance that this defense looks a lot different just because what Tony White did so well was be flexible consistently. And I think if you watch college football last year, you saw TCU use a 3-3-5 that was not flexible. Like that Georgia national championship
game. 2
game.
vastly different teams.
Yeah, exactly. That Georgia national championship game showed you to like, hey, this is why teams don't run the 3-3-5 all the time. But that was a 3-3-5 defense that kind of did the same thing game in and game out and got you to the national championship game. Michigan had no idea what to do with it. So I consider myself a little curious to see if we're going to see the same level of flexibility in the defense this year as we saw last year, which makes but the secondary is so important to the 3-3-5.
Well, yeah, I mean it's the trademark of it, along with the linebackers. Like those 8 guys are what makes your defense hum. And we've already heard from players that it feels like they've got a better understanding of the 3-3-5 just in general, because of Rocky Long, obviously, because the guy who created the defense is probably going to be the best guy to teach you about said defense. So it feels like the players are digesting more what the concepts of what this defense is supposed to do correctly. And hopefully Coach Long has some of the same versatility that White showed when he was coaching the Syracuse defense as well. As long as we just don't see zone coverage from the cornerbacks, I'll be happy.
That'd be nice.
As long as the quarterbacks actually press on the line for once, because bless you, Andy, because that was zone coverage and soft press from the cornerbacks has driven me to the points of insanity over the past 3 years.
How many times does that come up in the Slack during games?
It comes up from me at least once every other drive.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes 3 times a drive.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And it's usually on a 3rd down.
So outside of Barron, Farmer is the biggest DB on the roster, which is nice.
Yeah.
But
again, not to go back to my well, but like that's kind of what made Cisco so impressive as the Rover, was that he was able to be the edge run stuffer as well as a physically imposing defensive back to like match up with either, chip the inside guy that you wanted to run like the quick dump to on a zone read, or match up with that tight end that doesn't really have a matchup. We can get into Syracuse's recruitment of all the tight ends in a second, but it does feel like this is the kind of guy you take. And like Steve, we've talked about this a lot before. This is the kind of guy you take a flyer on. You bet on your culture, you bet on your locker room culture. You say, look, doesn't matter what he's coming in with. What matters is that once he's in here, he's going to be productive because we know his talent, and we are betting on our team culture, which again is the inside the lines, not measured in analytics thing. But for all the things that we've seen about Syracuse, I do think that Dino has a solid hold on the culture of this program. Like, it does seem like the guys who are there are bought in. Now, a lot of guys don't buy in and they leave very quickly, but the ones that do willingly come in via the transfer portal seem to buy in and seem to stick around.
Almost like what Mac's doing?
Yeah.
Hey.
Well, the biggest thing with Farmer also is that his biggest red flag is the off the field issues, seemingly, from what we just know about what the situation is. And from what we've seen this offseason, it seems like as long as you're respected in the locker room, most of the team's going to have your back if off the field situations arise.
Seems to be that case. Stupid thing. Andy, you were bringing up tight ends and how we're recruiting all of them, right? This is a team. All right. I'm gonna set the over under at. We're gonna go 6.5.
Now, do you count Oronde Gadsden as a tight end?
No, I'm talking actual people with their hands on the line.
Good.
The total number of passes last season caught by Syracuse tight ends. I think
it was. Yeah, no, I was exactly, Andy. I think it was 3, and I think it was all by Max Mag.
It is the under, but it is 6. 5 by Max Mang and 1 by Dan Villari.
Oh, hey. Dan Villari.
Under Dan did have a reception last year. But yeah, Mang at no point had more than a single reception in a game. It was every other game he had a reception, and a total of 31 yards receiving, and yet somehow we're recruiting all of the tight ends.
Well,
Now, the
I think
question
that
is, are we going to play them as tight ends?
Or we
Because,
just gonna put T
because
for the
Syracuse
name
is
on the
highest,
roster?
because Syracuse is highest rated recruit right now in the class of 24, Jamie Tremble, has come out and said that Syracuse coaches are recruiting him to replace Orlando Gadsden, which means he's not going to play tight end,
Right.
even though he's going to be listed in position as a tight end, and
Right.
is going to trick every recruiting or college whatever site, draft site, college football analyst site, to rank him as a tight end,
Mm-hmm.
even though he is so clearly a slot wide receiver.
The thing that I think makes a ton of sense, and I forget, I think it was Kevin, maybe it was Steve, maybe I'm confusing you and Kevin here in the Slack. But one of you guys was just like, look, try to get as many big, lanky guys that create matchup problems over the middle. Like that seems to be what they're going for. And I don't hate it because it does kind of make sense. Like if these guys were faster, they'd be wide receivers. If they were stronger, they'd be tight ends, and they'd be going to bigger schools. And so Syracuse is taking that linebacker philosophy that we talk about all the time in recruiting. Give us all of your tweeners, except we're now taking the tweeners on offense instead of the tweeners on defense. And
Tweener you?
I don't. What was that?
Tweener you?
That's an awful title. No, I despise that.
Tweener you.
We'll workshop that one. We'll come up with something a little better.
I don't think we should. I think we should just axe that right now on the production floor. And
Let's just
let it
we'll
die.
punt that. Yeah, we'll punt that.
I was gonna say tweener you sounds like something not safe to say on air.
Yeah, no. Let's go with a third down punt on that one.
Yeah. There. We're gonna Iowa that one. We're gonna Iowa.
No, it's not a third down punt. That's a Dan Orlovsky run out of the end zone.
UConn legend Dan Orlovsky. Never let anybody forget that. But yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense for Syracuse to do what they're doing in recruiting. And I guess this is a good segue to kind of talk about this, is that it seems like based off the very limited camp footage we have, there's not a ton of the recruits who are coming in who are going to be that instant, like 4-star impact starting every game guy that we've become accustomed to with Dino at the jump. We know someone is going to get hurt. It's going to suck. And one of them is going to need to come in and do something. I've accepted that as just fate of being with Syracuse. But with this expected to be more experienced squad, looking at the first 2 games of the year, we're looking at a Colgate and Western Michigan games where Colgate is bad and Western Michigan is bad and rebuilding. I'm kind of interested to see how much rotation we get now that the secondary has some bodies. The offensive line feels like a bit of a revolving door at every position. Like it feels like these first few games of the year might be more experimental than we're used to, even though I know that that's not always Dino's style.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. What did we talk about last week? Remember that Wagner game last year? Where the ones were out at the end of the third quarter?
Yeah. Now on defense, I bet we'll see a whole lot of change and messing around and figuring things out. But Dino, not one to pull the plug on his offense all that quickly.
He also doesn't show a lot early though. Like, you know, we've got new OC this year. Again, I think the expectation is that there's not going to be a ton of differentiation between Beck and A, but
I'm gonna say meet the new OC, same as the old OC.
But I like, there have been games, like I just can never get out of my head the Ohio game from a few years ago where Tommy DeVito was the starting quarterback, and I'm pretty sure they ran a total of 5 plays the entire game. Like they won the game pretty handily, but I think they ran 5 plays out of the same formation.
Yeah,
for the entire game. as Steve plays with his hair.
Yeah.
Now.
I have a Cindy Lou Who thing going on.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're all enthralled of watching Steve become a member of Whoville right now.
Oh God. So yeah,
I wonder how many kids actually know what Dr. Seuss and Whoville is right now, which is a distressing fact.
can confirm at least one 6-year-old does.
Well, at least you're raising him right.
Indeed. Between that and the Batman and Scooby-Doo mysteries, we're killing it.
Oh, that's Hanna-Barbera. Great
Oh,
show back there.
The comic series.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You know who else is a superhero on campus? Coach Mac. We're talking some Syracuse soccer here. It was actually really funny today. I have a friend who works as a broadcaster in the college sports ranks. He calls a lot of college soccer for the school that he works at. And he was asking me, he's like, can you explain to me soccer academies? And is it good that we have a player on our roster who went to a Manchester United academy? And I was like, well, let's talk about here's the breakdown of soccer academies. But let me talk to you about the soccer proliferation of academy dropouts that exists throughout the world, and why Coach Mack is the best at getting all of these guys, which led me to realizing this year's team has a former member of the Dortmund Academy, aka the academy that every young player wants to go to, and the Villarreal Academy.
They do pretty good too.
Mac is firing on all cylinders right now in the recruitment space, and it's kind of hilarious.
Remember what he said at the end of the game last year, at the end of the championship game last year? They have a bunch of Germans on their team for a reason.
I always love how candid he is with that sort of stuff. He's just like, yeah, why wouldn't I?
Well, it's in the Englishman nature.
Yeah,
I mean, the English are self-deprecating just as a nation in general.
Yep.
And no Englishman is going to disagree with me on that.
Very true.
All
I need to do is to prove that fact is to just show you why Arsenal Fan TV is so popular.
Oh wow.
Hey, we're 1-0. Okay, we got 3 points.
Yeah, you could barely beat the guy you just let go on a transfer.
We were fielding Kai Havertz. Okay, I feel like that's like
You
that
bought him.
automatic.
You legitimately bought him. You actually made an effort to buy Kai Havertz as your 9. I could have told you this is a bad idea.
Well, technically, he's not a 9. He's really
he's not a 9.
He's Arteta is getting drunk with power, and I kind of love it.
Yeah,
anyway.
I mean, Havertz plays more of that Firmino, like you are a 9 on paper, and then you just kind of rove kind of in the pocket. But either way, I was it's like not quite though, but I don't know. I was up there last night, watched the exhibition. There are so many goddamn kids on this roster, it's not even funny. I think they're carrying like 35 or 37 right now. It's stupid.
That including the 10 people they bought in this offseason.
Yeah. Oh, there's more than 10. I think there's like 14 or something.
Jeez.
And like to the point where somebody was wearing Noah's. So Singleman and Booster were on the Pine in sweats. Whether that's just because Mac already knows, like first exhibition, Mac already knows what he's getting out of those two. Yeah. He may have just been like, nah, you guys just hang out here and we'll dress the other 75 kids we have. Because when they were subbing, it was legit line changes. Like they ran through all 3 keepers. They subbed a keeper in the middle of the first half. I shit you not. And then proceeded to each sub break they had, they subbed at least 6 kids. It was line changes. We were playing hockey out there.
It's gonna be so funny when it's a platoon that just
just instead of changing tactics, you just change the entire team.
No, he's changing tactics by changing the team.
By changing personnel and not just one guy.
Remember back in like 2019, 2020, 2021, where Mac would sometimes switch to 4-4-2?
Yeah.
He's going to do that by just line changes.
It's like, no, we're just going to bring in a complete different backline and midfield unit. Just fine. So started out in the standard, 3-4-3. Jonah still looked good. Olu was at center back. Gavin Wigg got the other start, or one of the other starts at center back. The other guy was wearing Noah's jersey, and I have no idea who it was. It was definitively not Singleman, since he was kind of standing next to us. So I know it wasn't him, but he looked fine. Little shaky of the three, but overall it was, there's not much to glean against a match against Canisius, but it was good to see them out there and running and getting some reps in. Against Canisius, like, they were just far and away the more athletic and able to get away on things that or get away with things and just overpower people. And I actually left in like the 60th minute because there was lightning in the area, and you're not muted, Andy. And
my bad. Shit.
So
that was funny.
It was great. There was a line change from Canisius. They brought in their second or third or whatever squad, and every one of them was at least a foot shorter than everybody on Syracuse's team. And I was like, I'm not going to gain anything from watching this, so I'm leaving.
I guess one of the big questions that I've been asked about Syracuse soccer that I don't think I can answer was that we saw last year that the finishing prowess. Let me rephrase. The attacking prowess was really like a whole team philosophy, and that has always been something with Mac. But the finishing prowess was really limited to two guys, one of which is playing over in Europe right now
Yes.
at a high level.
Started on Saturday.
So that's really hard to replace at any sport in college. Like, you have a player at that level, you can't necessarily reload. I guess the question is that I have on behalf of a lot of other people is who is going to score the goals for this team? Because that's always kind of been the staple between a great MAC team and a solid MAC team is having that elite finisher.
Right. And they trotted out to start, transfer in, trying to remember his first name, but D'Agostino, I believe it's Felipe, trotted him and was it Nick Kalukian out there as with Leandro Baselli, who was around last year, in the whole kind of facilitating for them. A similar formation to what we saw last year with somebody behind Johnson and Opoku. Worked out well. Later on in the contest, you saw kind of a shift to a more traditional, like, Christmas tree. And there was some interesting interplay. Like, you saw Baselli get some run out wide as well. So overall, I mean, they showed a couple of different looks, nothing earth shattering, but just a couple of different variations on what you usually see from Mac. There did look to be talent up front. There were some people making some very nice runs, but again, it's against Canisius. I don't know. Like, I guess no matter what you're seeing patterns, and you're seeing runs, and you're seeing what people are doing. Everyone was very active up front. It was good to see. So we'll see how that goes compared to what we see when the season starts. I believe there's 2 more exhibitions, one on Wednesday, one on this coming Saturday. I may try and make it up to Wednesday, depending on various familial obligations. But it's gonna be a good run. So we'll see how everything goes.
The number 1 ranked men's soccer program, just a reminder, they are the first Syracuse team in a long while to open the season at number 1 in the coaches poll. Even field hockey, when they were repeating as national champions, only opened the season as number 1 the one time. And it was not the year that they were repeating as national champions, which is really annoying, but let's leave that to the voters.
Mateo Levesque, you'll hear that name a lot this year, by the way. New kind of number 8, a little more offensive focused, but was kind of all over the place. Facilitated and scored one of the 4 goals last night. So he's one you're definitely going to hear the name of.
Nice.
Yes.
Yes, I was going to say, Shout out to all the people who are listening from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, all three of you probably. There was a place across the street from me called Nice Pizza, and they served French pizza, and they always had the Nice game on. They closed after operating for 15 years this week. Very sad. Makes me upset. They were a great soccer bar. But I saw that Syracuse had a Nice guy on it. And I was like, of all the freaking years, I could have gotten the Syracuse game on there by just saying, like, look, I can show you a Nice player in this game.
We've got connections.
Got connections. But I think that is our show for this week. We are getting closer and closer to kickoff. Next week, we will begin the football previews in earnest. So prepare yourself for schedule reading, prepare yourself for record predictions, prepare yourself for Andy to mess up the names of half the members of the football team this year. It's going to bring back all the hits that you're used to hearing.
And not just one football team, 2 football teams.
Hey, that's all going to begin next week here on the Disloyal Idiots Podcast, a fans first Sports Nation podcast. Make sure that you like and subscribe on the podcast player of choice. It helps us trick the AI into expanding the Ottoman Empire. If you are watching this on Twitch, thank you so much. We really appreciate the support. We do this mostly every night, Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can watch us live there, or you can watch the replay as we embed it in our articles on our friends at newsmagician.com. If you are listening or reading to us from there, we appreciate the support as we have navigated away from SB Nation, but we appreciate our Noons friends for continually supporting us. And finally, thank you as always to our sponsors, Home Field Apparel. Use promo code Noons, NUNES23 for 15% off your first order at Home Field Apparel. Gentlemen, we are back in the swing of things. I'm excited. Go Orange.
Go Orange.
Go Orange.